Aquilo, Season 3, Chapter 6, Not Out of the Woods. Well, that was a trip. I'm not going to claim that having finally read the tracts distributed by the Pilvists, or cloud worshippers as I've been calling the cult, I now understand everything about them. Far from it. This is their marketing material. They distribute these tracts to the unbelievers in order to attract them. Each flyer is an invitation. It lays out what to expect from the Pilvist faith, it talks about what they discuss at their meetings, and it ends with a call to action on how anyone can join them every Wednesday and have a look for themselves. There, the tracts promise, all questions will be answered. It's even written in all caps, just so the double meaning doesn't go over the reader's head. But despite painting as positive a portrait of the faith as they can, the tracts don't fail to mention that in the Pilvist view of things, there is an end time. And there is, of course, a harsh price to pay for those who do not find the faith before that end time comes. It's all there, as plain as any religious text could be. Thinking of converting? I didn't even hear Gulliver walk in. He strides through the empty cafe before straddling his usual stool at the counter. I must say, after so many months of doing this work, one of my favorite things is how the Aquilo has become the sober equivalent of the local bar. We have our regulars, and we have characters. Some drop in just for a quick pick-me-up, while others spend the day chatting up the barista, either seeking an ear for their problems or glad to listen to someone else's. Today, it's for the latter. Not even a little, I answer. Did you know that these guys are a bit of a doomsday cult? Holding himself to the counter with one hand, Gulliver is leveraging his body backwards on his stool to get a better look at the pastry display. Behind the glass window sits an exciting array of the things I cooked up at the crack of dawn. I've got something I like to call breakfast profiteroles, which are just coffee cream and puff pastry topped with a piece of candied bacon. I wanted to find a way to sneak an egg in there, but I can't crack a tasty way of doing that. Yet. There are also 3 kinds of croissants aside from the plain: chocolate, 3 cheese, and one with maple drizzle and a light powdering of confectioner's sugar. I've got millefeuille, traditional recipe, and some flavored French meringues that come in lemon, almond, and a little concoction I like to call mimosa, like orange but with a little kick to it. There are no brownies or Nanaimo bars or donuts. Everything is light and fluffy, which should tell you where my mind's been at. Every cult is a doomsday cult, Gulliver says, pulling himself back up to a sitting position, if you're willing to wait long enough. Can I get 2 cheese croissants and some coffee? I busy myself getting his order while talking. I'm not sure I'm willing to go that far, but these guys feel like they have a much more immediate deadline. Do they? When the cloud no longer blesses us with its shadow. How ominous is that? They make it sound like a strong breeze is all it takes to usher in the end of the world. I slide a plate with 2 croissants in front of him, and before it's even done moving, Gulliver has already snatched a pastry up to be devoured. Kinda, but that cloud's been there since before I ever came to Aquilo, and it hasn't moved. If I have to be honest about it, that's always creeped me out a little. I don't speak my thoughts out loud, but I have to admit that of all the bizarre things in Aquilo, the cloud was, for a long time, hovering near the top of my list of creepy things. Much like the omnipresent white-robed cultists, however, it eventually blended into the scenery, just another part of the tapestry of Aquilo. Oh, that ever-present bright white cumulus? No big deal. It's nothing to worry about, especially when there are ghosts and demons prowling about. I was once told that the Pilvists really worship a goddess, one that does not enjoy being kept waiting, but I've never bothered digging further. It's no worse than Julia Remington's husband, I answer, carefully turning the knobs on the coffee machine in hopes I won't get burned. Besides, how long could this cloud have been here before you or I arrived? I think Gulliver was anticipating my question because he's already looking at the answer. He nudges his chin towards a painting on the back wall of the Aquilo. It's one of the few things I managed to salvage from the place after the so-called Inquisition trashed it. They'd been thorough to put at least one bullet through every surface available, but somehow missed that particular piece of canvas. Someone dug it up from the drywall and shattered glass, but I was the one who had it reframed and put back up. To think that, at the time, I did so because I thought it was pretty. "I'm no art critic, but I'd say that looks pretty old," Gulliver says. The painting is of a cloud, fluffy and bright on a slightly yellowed cerulean sky. There are pieces of the Aquilo skyline at the bottom. The two bell towers of the church and the colored roofs of the downtown businesses are recognizable, rising above the trees. But whoever painted this made the bell towers slightly different from one another, as if they were from different churches. And he painted the roof of the Aquilo a dark ochre instead of the sage green it is today. My heart races a little as I consider Gulliver's reasoning. He's right that it is an old painting, ancient by my standards. The oils are cracked and the colors have lost their luster. The canvas itself, seen from behind, looks as gray as dust, every fiber on the verge of turning into powder if so much as touched. So, when was it painted? And by who? And why? How far back does the connection between the Aquilo and the Pilvists reach? How long have the Dufour witches been baking croissants for the cult? The angry hiss of the coffee machine snaps me out of my reverie. Pilvists are all well and good, and weird, but they aren't my focus right now. While it's good to know there's more to the cloud worshippers than I've been assuming for over a year, that doesn't mean they're tied up with Petunia's disappearance. And if Ian and his followers have nothing to do with that, then it's a creepy problem for another creepy day. I serve Gulliver his coffee as the chimes to the Aquilo welcome a customer. Two, in fact. Michael and Pat, both some of my favorite regulars, both who only usually show up during the week. Which reminds me. Hey, I slide Gulliver the cream and sugar that he'll liberally pour into his coffee. What are you doing here on a Monday? Pandemic's cut down my deliveries to almost nothing. Since I've got nowhere to go, I figured I'd come back and catch some more of those lights. You want in? I'm about to decline, eager to remind my friend that someone vanished the last time we went to one of those things, and maybe we should focus on finding out why before dancing the night away again, when Pat interjects. Oh, are you talking about the danza lights? He nudges Michael with his elbow. To be that young again, eh? Michael chuckles, the tip of his thick mustache jiggling with the motion. The day hasn't started yet, and there's already paint in his hair. I don't know, Michael says, standing in front of the register. As fun as those days were, I'm happy to say they're behind me. Pat stands in line behind him. I already know what both men will order, so there's no point in even asking. I have sandwiches in the back, and I grab one for Pat, but I have to tell Michael that I'm out of cinnamon rolls as I pour him coffee. That's fine, he says. Just give me one of those maple croissant things. I do as requested, but I keep the conversation going. So, I ask, you guys went to the lights when you were young? Pat pulls the Kaiser bun off the top of his sandwich, inspecting the slice of Emmental like a jeweler authenticating a diamond. Who hasn't? He mumbles under his breath. Did you... I hesitate. Did you ever hear of anyone disappearing on one of those nights? The question seems to come as a surprise to both men. Michael fishes into his back pocket to pull out a wallet, but their shared look speaks of a quiet conversation. Drunk kids in their late teens? Oh yeah, they used to vanish into the forest for a while all the time, if you know what I mean. Hell, Pat and I did a couple of times ourselves, remember that? Michael beams a mischievous smile to his friend, but Pat seems less entertained by the memory, nearly dropping his bread on the floor. A different Pat from a different time, he says, putting his sandwich back together. He then thanks me before going to pick a table amongst the many empty ones. Michael grumbles. I'm gonna have to dig my foot out of my mouth again. He's about to go on with the task, but my hand reaches over the counter to take his arm. He looks almost as surprised by my action as I am. I'm sorry, I say, pulling my hand back in a sheepish gesture. But I have to ask, did anyone ever disappear and never come back? Michael's thick eyebrows knit together under a deep crease on his forehead. He's either thinking about it hard or annoyed at my insistence. After a moment, he blinks, satisfied with whatever he'd mulled over. I'm sorry, Miss Dufour, but no, not even once. He's about to leave when another thought seems to nag at him. This time, when he talks, there's a bit of sadness in his voice, like a man remembering something lost. They're just lights. They're not just lights. Sinclair isn't about to let it go. We'd made plans yesterday to meet up at the cafe when Stefan's shift started so we could investigate the woods. It wasn't part of Detective Wilson's recommendation. The good detective's idea was to stick to asking people questions. Find a motive, get alibis, focus on the why. And I know what you're thinking. Made plans with Thomas Sinclair? And I have to admit, it sounds as crazy as you think it does. But I also have to admit, he was a step ahead of me when we crossed paths at the Ashton farm. And maybe he's not the detective Aaron Wilson is, but Wilson's an old-school investigator. Older school than he probably should be, in fact. He's got both feet firmly on the real side of things. However, if I'm going to be pulling back the veil to uncover the secrets of the Donselites, and by extension find out what happened to Petunia, then maybe I need someone that's more of a believer. Someone whose curiosity allows for a more open mind. Someone less grounded. Everyone I've talked to says they are, I explain. Everyone who's been to the dances, that is. I blow a cloud of condensation into my palms before rubbing my hands together. I should have worn gloves, but my thoughts have been like scrambled eggs all morning. After talking to Michael, I chatted a bit with Pat, then with Julia Remington, who confirmed that she'd been to the Donselites in her youth also. In fact, I asked every customer whom I felt comfortable enough to as they walked through the door. Everyone had the same reaction. Their eyes veered to the side as they looked into the distance, into the past. I could see a tightness in their jaws, or a softness in their eyes, or any of a menu of subtle facial reactions that told of a very rich, very personal story attached to the lights. But while I couldn't get anyone to spill the details of their own personal attachment to the phenomenon, two things became clear. It's an event that dates back farther than anyone can remember, and everyone agrees that the floating globes of colorful luminescence are nothing more than lights. And Sinclair will have none of it. We're at the dance again. Sort of. It's the middle of the afternoon, which at this latitude and time of year feels like hours upon hours of sunset. We haven't had any real snow yet. A few drifts here and a handful of flakes there, but nothing that sticks to the frozen ground. The yellow light filtering between the naked trees seems frozen in time, and the whole forest looks like it's caught in stasis. And the clearing looks emptier than a box of donuts after a coffee break. It's a credit to Fred and Annabelle, and anyone else involved in putting together these clandestine events, that they live up to their motto of leaving the location in the same condition they found it. Instead, it makes the clearing feel empty and sterile, which is an odd thing to say about part of a forest. The effect is that much more pronounced with the lack of animal noises. And without snow to swallow up sounds, every step we take is that much louder. But that's what makes it strange, you see, Sinclair keeps arguing. Surely not everyone would be completely in agreement about what they remember. Dozens of people, all several years or even decades removed from an event, most remembering things through a thick, sticky lens of drunken memories. Isn't it weird that no one claims to have seen elves or fairies or aliens or something? In my experience, if you don't have some kook ranting and raving about how the orbs told them to kill their father or something, you know something's afoot. Oh, but we do have a kook ranting and raving. Not about patricide, thankfully, but about content for his podcast. I'm starting to regret bringing him along for this particular ride. Not because I disagree with him. I know what I saw, and I know Aquillo is more than capable of having mysterious lights that kidnap people. But I'm still uncomfortable having this outsider know too much about my adopted home. I need his help finding clues to Petunia's whereabouts, and I need to keep him from finding out too much about the true nature of Aquilo. It's a tightrope to walk, and better done by keeping a close eye on him. What's more likely, I ask, that the kids, people my age, are using some fancy tech toys to make some cool lights for their parties, or that there are ghosts in these woods? Or aliens, he's quick to add. See, I don't buy the mirrors and lasers explanation. You say you talk to a bunch of your clients. They can't all have been your age, which means some are older, which means some have seen the lights before drones and LEDs and all that stuff was available to the general public. So we're either talking about UFOs, fairies, and ghosts, or the only people who had access to that technology when Olivia was a teenager are involved, which means we're talking about the shadow government, which in turn circles right back to UFOs because that's where they got the technology in the first place. He is exhausting. And exhausted, red-faced and catching his breath, there's this manic smile plastered on his face. His plump, bearded cheeks puff in and out as he tries to recover from the frothy excitement he stirred himself into. I allow him to gather himself and climb back down from the precarious metaphorical scaffolding he's built. What a labyrinthian mind this Thomas Sinclair has. And I don't mean it in a complimentary way either. His is a brain where his consciousness can easily get lost, but there's a minotaur in there chasing it too, and I don't think he's aware of that particular danger. I can't tell you what the lights are for sure, I say, leaning in for emphasis. But they're not aliens. Whatever, he dismisses me. Let's have a look around and see who's right. Still smiling, like a kid in a playground, Sinclair wanders off to walk the perimeter of the clearing. Not knowing what I'm looking for myself, I take a minute to study his methods. They are far less professional than I would have hoped, but still oddly thorough. His journey around the circumference is carefully measured, the heel of his right boot touching the tip of his left, so on and so forth as he counts the steps. Every 5 steps, he pulls out his small digital camera to take a photo of the woods and one of the middle of the clearing. Then he scribbles something into his notepad. None of the data he's gathering makes any sense, but there seems to be so much of it that it makes up for the lack in his mind, a testament to the old adage that quantity has a quality of its own. Having observed the unique methodology of podcast investigation, I decide to take a more traditional approach. In this case, it means going to the site of the crime. I look for whatever landmark I can find, some leftover trace that I can use to anchor my memory of the dance onto. I need to figure out what the layout of things would be right now if Fred's DJ table, Annabelle's makeshift bar, the generator, and everything else were here right now. The generator. As thorough as the dancers are at erasing their steps, as diligent as they try to be picking up every last trace of their presence, they can't make the grass grow back overnight. I follow in Sinclair's footsteps, faster and more efficient, and trace the outer edge of the clearing. It's not long before I find exactly what I was hoping: singed grass. Careful as they may be, a generator, especially one as big as the kids use here, will do some damage to the surrounding foliage. The generator was behind the bar, and the bar was right next to the DJ table. I try to stand where I stood when I explained to Fred that Petunia had vanished. Then I walk back my panicked run from the forest to the clearing. It's not easy, but I manage to retrace my steps to where it was that I stood as I watched Petunia get erased from existence by bright, blinding light. Then I step forward. I go to the very spot where she stood. I put my feet where hers were, and I look in the direction in which she looked. Next to my boot, there's a red plastic cup. It still smells of vodka and mango juice as I pick it up. Something's not right. I remember when I was in my first year of CJEB, learning the valuable lesson about plastic cups at a party. This was before I met Trevor, before I made the plunge and decided to quit my degree in communications and become a world-renowned chef. It wasn't really that long ago, was it? But 3 years feels like an eternity when it represents over 1/10 of your life. or when you've already gone through enough existential changes. If I must be honest, I walked into CJEP from high school still a little naive. I wouldn't say I was straight edge or ignorant, but I was also convinced that I'd never be the kind of person who'd drink at parties, and certainly not someone who would take drugs. I wasn't into beer, and had yet to discover the magic of deglazing a saucepan with wine. I simply didn't see the point, and had bought into the idea that I needed no such social lubricant to have fun and make friends. By and large, I wasn't wrong. First party I went to, at a bar on Saint Denis Street where no one even tried to check my ID, I got along famously with everyone there. In fact, I embraced my role as the sober one and spent a good portion of the night making small talk with the bartender. We were there for first-year student initiation, not so much a hazing ritual as a welcome party. But it wasn't my first time in a bar or club. I'd been to a few taverns with my father in the past and was no stranger to the dynamics of the place. After that first party, I guided all my new friends to a local Greasy Spoon restaurant for the traditional poutine and hot dogs at 3 a.m. We crammed 6 into a booth, loud and obnoxious, picking out of the same enormous bowl of fries and cheese curds smothered in sauce. I'd accomplished my mission of keeping everyone hydrated and made sure they found a place to sleep before walking myself home. Friends for life, I thought these fellow students would become. Today, I can barely remember their names or faces. Then there was another student party, and another, one every week at least, sometimes in clubs, sometimes in a cramped apartment in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve or up in Villeray. Every time, I'd settle into my role of chaperone, watch as others made stupid mistakes, took dumb bets, and got sick from overestimating their own capabilities. That didn't last long. I couldn't be expected to eat chips and pretzels and lukewarm pizza forever without being curious about other flavors. Sip from some orange juice and catch a whiff of spiced rum. Clean up a spill and get the smell of cranberry and vodka on my fingers. Eventually, the curiosity and ceaseless offers of, try one, managed to wear me down, and as I was already exploring the idea of embracing my love of cooking, I ran out of excuses. If only for career purposes, I had to know what to expect from tequila and sambuca and gin. So I had my first red plastic cup of student cocktail. To my credit, I never became the kind of girl who'd pregame before a party just so I could be the first to get drunk. But I also stopped being the caretaker. I stopped being the sober one. I'd seen too many people make stupid mistakes to follow in their footsteps. That would come later, but I moved from my position near the bar and found myself more and more on the dance floor. I started wandering between various social groups among my peers. And I got to learn party etiquette. Like how you don't have to only drink what you bring, but you should bring something anyways. When someone buys shots for the table, eventually it should be your turn to buy shots too. Cutting in on a couple dancing in a certain way is asking for trouble and, at least in my social orbit, a closed door with a red plastic cup on the floor in front means do not disturb. I'll let you put together why. I know this isn't the same thing, of course, but I can't shake a feeling of familiarity. Of all the things Petunia had on her, her coat, her boots, why did the lights leave the cup that was in her hands? I bring the cup to my nose, breathing in the cold and stale mango vodka smell, using it to stimulate memories of that night. I can feel something, I don't know what, just out of reach of my senses. A faint connection to the party, to the people there, to Petunia. I can almost touch it. 189! And it's gone. Like an unchained rhinoceros, Thomas Sinclair beats through the branches and stray dry leaves. His heavy footsteps and labored breathing precede him, but both are heralded by his excited screams. The magic number, 189. What the hell are you talking about, Thomas? The circumference of the clearing is just a little over 206 boot lengths, he says, pointing at his feet. My boots are 11 inches long, on the nose. That's 2,068 inches, which is, drumroll! He beats on his thighs with his gloved hands in a fast rhythm. He keeps at it for a while before I realize he's waiting for me to somehow figure it out. 189 feet? It's a guess, but Sinclair's face explodes with mischievous delight. Yes, and you know what that means. I shake my head slowly, a tight smile on my lips, instead of the open-handed slap I really want to give him. But I invited him on this journey because I wanted his outside perspective, for better or for worse. I guess I just rolled the dice wrong and got the latter. I have no idea, I explain, mourning the small clue that had escaped the edge of my thoughts. Thomas leans in. His features are getting hard to read, with the sun slowly dipping down below the horizon. The shadows of each tree now stretch so deep into the forest that their branches and tips disappear into nothing. 3 times 7 times 9. The 3 primordial magic numbers, multiplied in sequence, for which the result is 189. This isn't a dance floor, it's a magic circle. It's astrological mathematics, which has a deep connection to Hermetic magic. This is big, Miriam. Big. My fingers are freezing to the sides of the plastic cup, and night is fast approaching. Whatever clue I thought I had found has vanished as completely and in the same location as Petunia did. This entire endeavor, the whole walk into these woods to find clues, all of it, a complete waste. Except for a magical number that means nothing from someone who took measurements with his boots. No, Thomas, it is not big. I wave the plastic cup in his face, sprinkling him with the last drops of mango vodka student cocktail. It is literally nothing. I thought you knew how to do all this investigation stuff, that you read about the Pilvis, that you find a connection. He's stunned, his features blank. He looks like a kid whose mom just snapped at him. But it does mean something. We just have to figure out what that is. You need to open your mind to the... I don't listen to the rest. I don't need my mind opened. I've had the doors to that barn blown off since last year. My anger is almost as much directed at myself as it is at Sinclair. I'm pissed that I can't find the connection between this place and Petunia's disappearance. I'm frustrated that I've somehow missed out on uncovering more about Ian and his cloud worshippers. Most of all, I'm furious at how helpless I feel. Things wouldn't be so bad if everyone around me wasn't being so dismissive or stupid about it. A young woman evaporates into thin air, and the best anyone can do is shrug and say, "Aquilo, am I right? What are you going to do?" Minutes pass before I stop seeing red. Precious time during which I should have been paying attention to where I was going. Time enough for the last of the sun to go to bed, leaving only an orange and pink halo that fades into the clouds above. It's beautiful and peaceful and lonely. I immediately know that I'm lost, but I also know that this particular patch of forest is surrounded by farms and roads. Assuming I can walk in a straight line and not in circles, I can find some sign of civilization within an hour. Failing that, I've got a cell phone. If Thomas followed me, he's lagging too far behind to be heard, or maybe he's lost himself. It doesn't matter. I'll trace my steps back, find him, give him some sort of half apology, and we'll make our way back to the cafe. This experiment was a failure. The 15 to 20 minutes of pure silence as I walk through dried leaves and step over branches, breathing in the sharp air and seeing the final vestiges of sunlight get swallowed by the low hills in the west, help me settle down. It's the sort of therapeutic loneliness that helps me reset my compass. When I do see the bright light of Thomas's flashlight, I've found my level again. I'm more willing to forgive him for breaking my line of thought. We'll talk on the way back. I'll even give him a chance to explain this hermetic astrological numbers nonsense to me, on the off chance there's something to it. But Thomas's light isn't moving. There's no bobbing or weaving, and it's only getting brighter because I'm the one moving towards him. Has he seen me and he's waiting? Is he okay? Or has he vanished too, leaving only his flashlight for me to find? Thomas! I say, relieved to see him as I push through between two firs. Glad to see you're okay. Listen, Shh! He shushes me but doesn't move. He's standing still, his eyes and flashlight pointing in the same direction. No blinking. No movement. just his blank stare riveted onto something in the shadow of the trees. Quietly, knowing what these woods can hide, I get in close to him. Following his eyes, I see it now too, brought forth in stark contrast by the encroaching night and bright flashlight, an iris of hundreds, thousands of branches woven together into a freestanding structure. It's at least 10 feet tall and as ominous as one might fear. Surrounded by dozens of dolls and figures, each assembled from twine, wood, and mud, the structure is inert. Which is good, because while I've never seen the thing, or even had it described to me, I've no doubt that this is the Hell Gate. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.